different to how his views became. The Nation of
Yeah, we'll do
Islam,
that. Yeah.
what their Sonny Liston fight in '64,
Yeah.
what you remember of that, the draft, we'll go through that,
Yeah.
the Rumble, the Nation of Islam, and what their relationship with Ali, and how initially they kind of loved him and took him to their breast. Then when he wasn't making any money, they couldn't be found, and sort of
No,
how.
that's not true.
So,
That is not true.
So they didn't, when he wasn't making money, they were around to support him.
No, they helped him when he needed money. When he needed money to fight the draft situation, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave him money.
So they supported him all the way.
Yeah.
Right, okay, well, I'll just get your views on that. Then we'll talk about the Rumble, and then we'll talk about if you knew any of his wives, what they were like, Veronica or Belinda.
Knew all of them.
What was he a family man? We've heard about his womanizing. That's documented already. Is this true? Did you see any of that? In Melina, I think it actually came to a head between Belinda and Veronica. That's kind of a crossover period. Were you around it then? Was it a bit of a stress for him? And also his own personal religious journey, how he kind of had a journey himself, because he came out and actually, because I think it's Elijah Muhammad's son that actually came into more orthodox Islam, different to what his father actually preached. That was Wallace D. Muhammad, and that is more the Islam that Ali follows today, and which is nothing to do with, very little to do with the sort of the anti-white rhetoric that.
Well, Ali was never anti-white. How could you explain me?
Well, the thing is, that's one of the questions. At one stage, he was on stage saying things like, talking about white devils, yet he had Angelo Dundee, who was a white trainer. So
Angelo Dundee wasn't around us that much. He would come in 3 days before a fight and leave.
Yeah, but still, he was his trainer, and he was white, and that was
Ali was his own trainer.
Well, regardless of that, Angelo Dundee is documented as Ali's trainer, and he was white, yet Ali had anti-white rhetoric from the pulpit with the Nation of Islam backing. So it's just about trying to remedy those kind of two images.
Yeah, we'll go over it. I'll give you a good one.
Okay, if you want, so we'll make a start. Let me just turn my own voice down, and my own voice in my head's a bit too loud. Hang on.
Did you get in touch with Chuck Wepner?
Hang on 2 seconds. Kelly, which one is it? Is it the one at the very far left?
So that's your overall.
Oh, that's
volume.
my overall. Right. Which one? Headphone. Which one is it? Is it the?
You can't do it from there.
Oh, right. Can you my voice is too loud in my headphones. Sorry. Sorry, Jean. I'm just turning my own voice down. Hello, testing. Yeah, that's much better. Thank you very much, Kelly. Thanks. Okay, I'm ready whenever you are.
Go ahead.
Okay, Dean, can you tell me about the first time you ever met Muhammad Ali? What were the circumstances?
Well, I met him. I was in Rome at the Olympics, and I was in the service. I was playing sports in Munich, Germany, and they needed someone to go over to sign pay vouchers and passes and all for the Olympic boxing team, Eddie Crooks McClure. So I went over there, and I first met him. I was in awe. He was such a nice guy and a humble guy. And I remember one time we were walking down the street, and an individual came up and he asked him. He said, "Do you have any money?" He's this poor man, and Ali reached in his pocket and he gave the man $5. And I said, "How much money do you have on you?" He said, "I had 8 and I only have 3 now." And I said, "Well, why would you give him all that money?" He said, "That must have been a test from God." He said, I gave him what I felt comfortable with. And he said, if he was lying, well, then he got to answer to God, like I have to answer to God. So he was raised by a beautiful woman, his mother, Odessa, and his father, Cassius. And they always taught him about caring for people, being good to people, being kind to people, and God will always look out for you.
Did you know his parents very well? Do you know anything about?
Very well, yes. I was a pallbearer for his mom and his dad, and I was the only outsider. There was no other one other than the family, and I'm very close with all his children, with the different wives, and his brother Rahman Ali, and his mom and dad loved me. I was very close with them. I remember when my mom passed away, and I came home and I'm sitting on my bed very sad, and the phone rang, and it was Muhammad's mother, and she said, "Hi, Gene." I said, "Mama Bird, how are you?" "I'm doing good." I said, "I just lost my mother. My mother just died." And there was a silence, and then she said, "Well, you'll be my son, I'll be your mom, and you always call me if you need something." But this is the type of woman she was. She was a very sensitive and caring woman.
Jean, so this is just my fault. When you're giving me your replies, and that was brilliant, by the way, but from now on, could you try and repeat my questions in your answer? So if I say my next question is, what was your initial impression of him? You'll say, my initial impression of him was...
Okay, you want me to repeat your question?
No. Yeah. Not don't repeat what you just did, because that was fine. But for the future, from now on, if you could remember to do that, that would be fantastic.
Just answer your questions. Okay.
Yeah, and just repeat the question in your answer.
Repeat it first, and then come back with...
Yeah, so if I say to you, what was your initial impression of Muhammad Ali?
And then I'll say my initial...
Exactly.
Go ahead, yeah.
That's the one. I just want to ask you, just because you were so close to the family, and there are not many people who actually knew Ali's mum and dad very well, what was your impression of his dad?
I thought his dad was a very strong individual. He was a caring person. He loved his sons. He believed that the mother should be at home with the children, raising the children, while he was out working. He was an artist. He painted all of the pictures in most of the churches in Louisville, Kentucky, the religious pictures. And I remember Muhammad Ali told me one time, he said that when he would paint the pictures of Jesus and all the apostles and all the saints, and he said something was wrong, there was no black people there. He said, where was the black people? There must have been the cooks in the kitchen. So he was looking for religion. And that's how he started wondering about Islam.
Okay, and can you just tell us the story of how you came to work with Ali? I know this is way down the line coming from his early days, but I just want to establish you and who you were in Ali's life. So how did you come to work for Muhammad Ali?
Well, the year was 1967, 68, when he was in exile, and I was working at that time in New York City with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Movie Company, and he was going through some tough times, and I suggested to him about this college lecturing where they had different people lecturing all over, and I introduced him to a gentleman in New York who he was an agent for all the colleges, and he met with he met with Muhammad. He liked him, and then he sent out brochures, and Muhammad was the most sought after to speak at the colleges, and he would go there, and then when I had time to go with him, I would go with him, and I remembered like. When he would get paid and we'd cash the check, and the first thing he would do is stop by Western Union and send money home to his mom and dad. He was a caring person.
And what would you say what was your job with Ali? Did you have a job, or were you just...
No, at that time I was working with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in New York City. And then I tried to get him a boxing license. I met with Governor John Bill Williams in Mississippi, and they gave us a license to fight there. But then when it hit the newspaper, they always said, no, it was only a permit, so they withdrew it. So it was just a matter of time that he would get a license. And then the fight happened in Atlanta, and then New York jumped on the bandwagon. They knew the valuable of him fighting at Madison Square Garden, all the money it would create in New York City, and all the hotel rooms and all the tickets and all the excitement. So it started there. And then I realized I was telling him I went over his expense with him one time. He was paying for hotel rooms, paying for that, and I told him that he should have his own training camp. And he said, that would be great. So we looked for a place, and it was Deer Lake, Pennsylvania. It was 150 miles from New York City. It was 100 miles from Philadelphia. It was 100 miles from Baltimore. 125 miles from Washington. So it was centrally located where the press could get there, and it would still keep people away, from a big city where everybody's mobbing you. And it was a very successful move for him. He trained there for the most successful fights in his career.
So you were instrumental in setting up his Deer Lake training camp?
That's correct.
That's brilliant. So just remind me, this was about 67, 68 or late
No, we
60s?
didn't set it up till 1970. We started working on it in 1970. I resigned with MGM Movie Company and went full time with him, and I became his business manager. I was the only one ever had power of attorney to sign checks and sign anything in his bank. He trusted me implicitly.
So you were with Ali from 1970 full time.
Right.
Excellent. Okay. And what was your relationship with Muhammad Ali like? How would you describe your relationship with Muhammad Ali?
Well, I said many times if I should die tomorrow and go to heaven, it would be a step down because my heaven was with Muhammad. How I seen him care for people, and he was a caring person and a good person. And I used to say, I'm so lucky. People come to see him and they could go home and I can stay here. And we were like two kids driving down the highway. We were very, very close. And I was accepted by all of the Muslims who were around Ali, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Herbert Muhammad. They seen some value to me, and they seen that I was a pretty honest guy.
Okay, I'm just going to go back to the beginning. Can you tell me your memories of when Ali won the Olympic gold for his country in 1960? He was 18 years old, and he came home and he was refused service in a restaurant. How do you think this incident affected the young Cassius Clay, as he was known at that time?
Well, I do remember in Rome when people would tell him, you're a black man, you still can't eat in the restaurants in America. And he said, yeah, but things will change. And then I heard the story about how he went to eat in a restaurant in Louisville, and he was turned down, and he got so depressed and disgusted that he took his gold medal and threw it in the river.
Now,
But at that time, he told me a story one time that he was standing in. He went to his church at that time. He was a Southern Baptist, and they were singing songs about Jesus. We love Jesus and all. And his father had painted the pictures in the church. And then after the services, he walked down by a white man's church, and they were singing the same songs. And all of a sudden, the minister came out, and he's standing there by himself, very inquisitive. And the minister said, "Hey, boy, what are you doing here? You don't belong here." And he looked at the minister, and he realized something's wrong with that religion. They believe in the same God that I believe in, and they treat people wrong. There's something wrong. And then he started hearing about the black Muslims, the Nation of Islam, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And he was saying, we're black men, we don't have our own name, we don't have our own country. If you meet Mr. Chung, he's from China, Mr. O'Rourke from Ireland. Everyone has their own name and their own identification. And who do we have? You see a man walking down the street. Here comes a black man, George Washington. Well, you knew something was wrong.
So you think it was at that point, because that's a good story, because I've not heard the story about the minister before, the white minister coming out of the church and not being very friendly to Ali. So that's a good insight. Now, so do you think this was the turning point? Do you think this was the thing that steered Ali towards the Nation of Islam?
He was a religious individual, and he was looking for something. And then when he started hearing the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and who I think was one of the great men in our history, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad cleaned up more black people, and he cleaned up drugs and drinking, and the record speaks for itself. And I believe in my heart, if it wasn't for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Muhammad Ali wouldn't have been successful, because it gave him a religion. It gave him something where he could be devoted to, and it gave him a cause. He has just as much right to believe in Allah as the Pope does Jesus Christ, or have Jewish people believe in the Messiah.
And so basically, you would say, my next question is, what was it about the Nation of Islam that appealed? Would you say that he felt a sense of belonging with the Nation of Islam?
He felt a belonging and a welcome and an education. And he was looking for something. He always loved black people. And, I was accepted by them. And as they were preaching that the black man or the white man was the devil, They wasn't. They were referring to the white man that castrated the black man, that hung the black man. You know, I sat down with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he said, "We don't consider you a devil. You have never hung a black man, or you are so loyal to my brother Muhammad Ali. You will always be with us." And I appreciate that, and that was my relationship with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
So what do you say about, because I know that they had quite a heavy stance on integration and about sort of blacks and whites mixing, and Muhammad Ali himself has been heard and quoted in our archive of him saying about no integration ever, black people, black guys shouldn't go with white girls, black girls shouldn't go with white guys, all the rest of it. So really the rhetoric came right down the line. So even though Elijah Muhammad liked you as an individual and your experience was different, what was coming out of the pulpit was actually very much whites on one side, blacks on the other.
You know, in those days, in the early 70s, if a girl came home and said she was dating a black man, the family would disown her. I mean, you still have prejudice in the world today where a Jewish family wants their son or daughter to marry in their faith. The Catholic wants them to marry in their faith. And, everybody has their own prejudice. So the Muslim teaching, the black Muslim teaching, he loved the black people, and he didn't want to see any sadness come or any abuse. He wanted to see the black man marry the black woman and the white man marry the white woman.
Suppose a black man wanted to marry a white woman and felt that he loved her. Would that sort of cause problems? Because I know even Jerry Eisenberg actually eventually had and still has a black wife. So and he was friends with Ali, sort of.
Yes, he had a black wife, and she's a beautiful woman and a great woman, and we always accepted Jerry and his wife. We didn't say he was wrong. Who are we to judge? If you say, Johnny, what makes Mary so beautiful? To see Mary's beauty, you got to look through Johnny's eyes. So it wasn't about that, but I'm sure there were times when Jerry Eisenberg walked in a restaurant with his wife, and it caused some problems, and he left. The famous Joe Louis, Frank Sinatra used to call him, "Come on, Joe, we're going out to dinner," and he didn't want to go because he didn't want to cause any embarrassment on Frank by going to a white restaurant where they didn't have black people going in there.
Yeah, so it was a very tough time that they were living in. Certainly at that time in the 60s and the 70s and going through, certainly it wasn't integrated and it was difficult. We do know that. So just going on to the Sonny Liston fight in 64. Actually, let me just go back. Malcolm X, how instrumental was he in Ali's conversion to the Nation of Islam?
Well, nothing. The one who introduced Ali to the... this is the true story that people don't realize, and the first person who took Muhammad Ali to listen to a Muslim minister was his dad in Louisville, Kentucky. And he went into the mosque, and he heard this black man preaching about we don't have our own country, we don't have our own name, and it put it planted the seed. And then he met a guy by the name of Abdul Rahman, who at that time he was known as Captain Sam, in Miami, Florida, and he started telling him all about the religion, and he took him to he took him to the mosque, and he liked it, and he believed in it. But it was Abdul Rahman, a.k.a. Captain Sam, that really introduced him to the religion.
So how did Muhammad Ali become friends with Malcolm X?
Well, Malcolm X was like the number two man in the movement of the Nation of Islam. And Malcolm was a very firing speaker. He was articulate, and he was worth listening to.
And so, because I've obviously read that they've obviously got they had quite a good relationship, and he was inspirational to Muhammad Ali.
Well, I know one time that when Malcolm was making the movement to leave the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that he approached Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad wouldn't go with him. He stayed with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So that speaks for itself.
And in terms of the 64 fight, just in terms of the background of that, there's some sort of, I think it was Betty Shabazz who told the story of that Malcolm X actually turned up at the fight, but I believe it was I don't think Honourable Elijah Muhammad wanted Malcolm to go to the fight. Is that correct? What was the background to that?
No, Elijah Muhammad was not a dictator. If he wanted to go, he could go. He didn't have any objections to that. That's something that's not true. And when he went there, the people down in Miami, they didn't think he should be there, and they asked him to leave, and he left.
So why did Elijah Muhammad? Because I think Betty tells the story that Elijah Muhammad did not want to be associated, because at the time the Sonny Liston fight, we're building up to that. We have Ali and we have Sonny Liston. We have
Betty who?
Betty Shabazz.
And what did she say?
Basically, I'm just talking about the lead up to the fight, that if Malcolm X, if her husband Malcolm was to go to the fight, Elijah said, you don't go with the Nation of Islam, you go on your own. Because if you go, because we do not want to be associated with losers, and this was in relation to Cassius Clay, because everybody thought...
Well, that's not a true story. I object to that story.
Okay, well, that's what Betty Shabazz has gone on the record
Well, she
to
could say what she wanted to say, but the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he told Muhammad Ali, he said, how can you lose? Allah's on your side. And that gave Muhammad all the courage, all the strength. That how can he lose? That Allah's on his side. That's just like a Notre Dame playing football. They go to church and all. Hope God permits us to win. But he believed in Allah, and that's. And right after the fight, he didn't say all praise is due to Malcolm. He said all praise is due to Allah.
So, before the fight, his name wasn't actually Muhammad Ali, remember? His name was, to the public, certainly to everybody else, not to the inner circles. His name wasn't actually Muhammad Ali at that stage, I don't think.
That was Cassius Clay, but the inner circle and the people around them, the Muslims who were around him at that time. And he was given the name Muhammad Ali by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad before the fight. And right after the fight, he said he wanted to be known as Muhammad Ali.
Okay, and so take me back to the night of the fight. What are your memories of that actual night?
Well, I was in New York at that time. I wasn't in Miami, but I hear it was, I hear there was a lot of talking about it, and some of the promoters down there weren't too happy. And what are we going to do with this guy? And that's all I know about that.
And in terms of the build-up, because obviously general consensus was that everyone thought that Sonny Liston would win. Tell me about the odds. What was the feeling, the general feeling behind winners and losers, the odds? What was the consensus?
Well, Sonny Liston was a big favorite, but you got to remember one thing, that the strong will beat the weak, but the brains will beat the strong. And Muhammad was so brave and so strong, and there was not a smarter fighter between the four posts than Muhammad Ali. And he had no fear. Like he said, Allah's on my side, I have no fear. He should have the fear.
Did you ever get to meet Sonny Liston around that time?
I met him in Vegas here. Hello, goodbye. There was, no conversations.
What was your impression of him when you met him?
He was a big, strong, intimidating guy. But if you look at history, Sonny Liston intimidated people. And then at that time, Cassius Clay, he beat Sonny Liston. And then later, Leotis Martin came back and beat Sonny Liston. George Foreman was intimidating. Muhammad Ali beat George Foreman. And then Jimmy Young came back and beat George Foreman. All of a sudden, that fear where you take the bully and all of a sudden you create him to be not invincible, but you show that he's human. He can't go on.
And in terms of, I'm just going to go to the day after, because the day after, Cassius Clay came out publicly as being a member of the Nation of Islam, so the public now knew. How contentious was this at that time?
Well, nobody knew. In America, you never heard of the Muslim religion. When he became a Muslim, then everybody said, hey, wait a minute. Everybody thought there was just Jews, Catholics, and Protestants. The world was small at that time. You didn't have exposure to television and everything else. And then people start talking about it, and, he believed in it. And I believe in my heart. he should worship to who he wanted to worship. That's what this country's made of. Would they say anything about anything else? He made a big sacrifice.
But the public, in terms of the way the general, so the response to Greater America, I mean, they seemed to be quite shocked at the news, didn't they?
Well, they could be shocked, Down south, I'm sure they didn't like to see a black champion. People can be shocked, but they're reading the paper, somebody's byline. Some writer sits down, it's his byline, how he feels. But that doesn't necessarily it's right. When you want to sit down and relax at home and you say, wait a minute, he has just his right to believe in whoever he wants to believe in.
And basically, he publicly came out as being known, eventually as being known as Muhammad Ali. Elijah Muhammad gave him that name. Excuse me. Now, not everyone readily called Cassius Clay by his new name. Why do you think that was?
Ignorance. Let me say this. If Molly McGuire became a nun and took the name Sister Mary Angela, people would call her Sister Mary Angela. If Diane DeBuey married Louis Camelli, they'd call her Mrs. Camelli. So when he accepted the name Muhammad Ali, people should have called him his name. That's what he accepted.
Why do you think they didn't call him his name readily?
That's their opinion. They can do that today even. Everybody, you can't control people's minds, you just that's their opinion. That's what they perceive.
What did they perceive though? Because it was not based on nothing. It was obviously based on the association with the Nation of Islam and everything that meant.
I can't say how they felt. I could say how I felt. I felt if he wanted to be called Muhammad Ali, that's what I would call him. But he changed his name to Joe Black, that's what I'd call him. I respect people, and that's what you must do.
And how do you think changing his name affected his public persona, how he was perceived by the general public, press?
He became known all over the world. The Gallup Post survey took a survey, the most recognizable man on planet Earth, Muhammad Ali.
And
that's how he was received.
And in terms of, I'm just going back to sort of his name, because not everyone obviously called him Muhammad Ali, and this documentary is called What's My Name? The Muhammad Ali Story, getting into the actual identity and the person of who Muhammad Ali really was. Now, there were two fights in particular. Now, I know you hadn't joined him then. These were the Floyd Patterson fight and the Ernie Terrell fight. The Floyd Patterson fight was in November 65, and Ernie Terrell, I think, was February 67. Now, these fights in particular seem to have very personal fights for Ali. And I think with Terrell, he definitely, with each punch, asked him, what's my name? What's my name? Now, were you aware of these fights?
Yes, I was aware of it. Terrell didn't want to respect him. Terrell said, I'll call him Cassius Clay. He said, my name is Muhammad Ali. And then, we go on from there. The same way with Floyd Patterson. I call him Clay, His name is Clay. Floyd Patterson said his mom and dad called him Clay. But his mom and dad called him Ali and Muhammad. And I'll tell a little story that years later that I was having dinner with Floyd. I had lunch with Floyd Patterson, and he was talking about how's Cassius Clay. I said, Floyd, when you got married, everybody called your wife Mrs. Patterson. I said, if he's entitled to be called whatever name he wants, and it's a thing about respect. I said, President Kennedy was in the White House, and Robert Kennedy called him president. I said, a man is entitled to be called what he wants to be called. He said, I guess so. And that night, Muhammad and I were having dinner, and here comes Floyd and his wife. And Floyd said, hello, Muhammad. And Muhammad said, hey, Floyd, how you doing? He said, why don't you sit down with us? He said, no, I got to go to a show, but we'll see you. So he took my advice.
So do you think there was any contention? Because I know obviously linked to the name Muhammad Ali was his embracing of the Nation of Islam. Do you think people found this quite hard to accept? Maybe the American public weren't ready to accept this?
Well, that was their problem. That wasn't his problem. That's their problem. If they don't want to accept it, they don't have to accept it. But he did nothing to dignify the name. He upheld the name that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave him, and he went on to do great things. He was charitable to everybody. He was known all over the world. Everybody respected him. Everybody wanted to see him. I was in London with him one time, and we were in a cab, and a cab driver announced, he said, "I got the man here with me." And all of a sudden, people were, all cab drivers, everybody was diving around looking, Ali, Ali, and he was waving to them and all. But he paid the cost to be the boss. He paid the sacrifice with the 3 years, his best 3 years of his life in exile. There were people here in America born burning draft boards, but they never took their passport. But they took his passport.
We'll just go on to the Vietnam bit, actually. I just want to get your opinion on all that. I mean, he refused to fight in Vietnam. For some, that made him a villain. To some, he was a hero for not going to fight in Vietnam. For Muhammad Ali, he cited religious reasons for not going. Then he came out with the famous phrase, "Man, I ain't got no quarrel with the Viet Cong." What was your reaction when you heard him stand?
Well, if you sit back and you look at history, in Vietnam, the rich people went to live in Paris while the war was going on. Our soldiers went over and got killed there. And here he said it's an unjust and unholy war. He was right. He proved the war wrong. Years later, McNamara, Secretary of Defense under John Kennedy, came out and said the same thing. And I had a friend of mine by the name of Bobby Carmody. He was on the Olympic boxing team with Joe Frazier. He was a flyweight champion. He won the bronze medal. And he was killed in Vietnam. And I went to the funeral, and I asked Joe to go with me because Joe knew him. And we went there, and I thought somebody was going to say something, Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali. And when I got there, the people at that funeral, they said there should be more people like him so our boys wouldn't be getting killed over there.
Brilliant, because a lot of people actually felt, because in a way, would you say to a certain degree, Jean, that he was kind of, because when he actually said, "I ain't got no quarrel with the Viet Cong," was there in America at that time an anti-Vietnam lobby? Do you think he might have sparked it, or maybe he gave it a resurgence? Do you think he had an impact on the anti-Vietnam lobby at all by taking that stand?
I'm sure he did, but he believed in his heart what he was doing was right. We met with a famous lawyer in New York one time, and he told us, in America, there's a right to work. We could sue all of the states that wouldn't give you a boxing license. And he said, "No, I believe what they were doing in their heart was right. They believed what they were doing in their heart was right, like I did. I'm not suing anybody." So I don't know if it sparked it or not, but there was still a lot of people. Here in America, we have young guys went up to Canada so they wouldn't get drafted. Now they came back and they're big politicians here. I have a friend of mine was a school teacher. He graduated he was out of law school. He just came out of law school, and now he's going to get drafted. So he took a job teaching for 2 years, and he got a deferment. I mean, who's draft dodgers? The ones who went to Canada, or the ones who got some false deferment from the government so they could go on with their career? Muhammad Ali took a stand in his belief, and he paid a price for it. But God looked down on him and said, "Don't worry, I'm going to take care of you."
Do you think Ali might have been the first person, famous person, certainly, renowned person, to speak out against the Vietnam War, do you think?
Oh, I don't know. I think there was a lot of people spoke out about it. I don't know how famous they were or not, or what publicity they got. But at that time, Muhammad Ali, at that particular time, if he would have said, "I'm not going to wear a blue suit anymore," it would have made the headlines. They talk about boxing today, closed circuit. Muhammad Ali could have had dinner with his wife and family, closed circuit, and would have did better than some of the boxing events are doing. Because everybody want to know about Muhammad Ali. Everybody want to see him, touch him, know him.
And I'm sort of digressing a little bit. You've just touched on a point. Not every boxer has the same level of arouses the same level of interest. What is it about Muhammad Ali that everyone wants to know, even if he says, "I'm going to wear this today"? Why is it that people hang on his every word and want to know so much about what he is doing and thinking?
Muhammad always had time for the poor, the powerless, the depressed, the deprived. He related to the little people. He told me one time if God would come back, he won't come back as a millionaire with a big Rolls Royce. He would be here as a humble man, so you never know who you're dealing with. He related to the small people. He treated a king, a queen, a president, an emperor with respect. And he also treated the humble guys. I mean, so many times I've seen people come up to him, had no money. He gave them money. He helped people. He couldn't say no.
Actually, Jerry Eisenberg said that you need to tell the story, and I've got a bit where he says Gene Kilroy tells this story really well. Can you tell the story about, and actually, if you can remember when roughly this happened, there was a program, and this, I think the Jewish old people or Jewish synagogue was looking
Yes,
for money.
that's no problem at all. The year was 1971. We're in New York City, and it was a cold winter night, January, and it came on the news, and it showed a Jewish home was going to close down. They had no money. And then it went on to something else. And he asked me, we're sitting watching TV. He said, find out where that is. I called the radio or the television station. They told us. And they told us that the people there didn't qualify for Social Security or any charitable deductions from America, and they were closing this home down. So he said, well, let's take a ride over there. So we got in a cab. We went over there. We went in. Ali asked who was in charge. And there was all those old people there, 85, 90, 80. And you could see the worriment on their face, the panic, And he asked who was in charge, and this articulate man came out in his 60s. He said, I am. So Ali said, what would it take to keep this place going? He said, a lot of money. Ali said, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. He said, Gene, write a check for $300,000 and give it to him now, and I'll sign it, which I did. And then he said, you could take this to the bank and cash it tomorrow. And here's another one for $200,000. Just wait 2 weeks and cash that. He said, would that keep you open? Oh, my God, this is a godsend. And he said, I don't want you to tell anybody what I'm doing because I'm doing it from my heart. And I don't use it as a write-off. I just do it because to help those people get food and keep the place open. And when we got back in the car and we're heading back, he looked at me. He said, this isn't money for me. I could make this as in an exhibition. He said, kindness to others is the only rent we pay for our room on earth. So we got to be good to people. That was his attitude.
Do you think you learned anything from knowing Muhammad Ali in the way that he was?
Did I learn anything?
Mm-hmm.
Did I learn anything? I learned everything. I learned that if a black man walks in a store, everybody's going to follow him around. A white man walks in a store, nobody bothers him, everybody. A black man stopped with a ticket, they treat people different, the black man and the white man. There's still so much prejudice in the world.
And do you think that at any time within Muhammad Ali, obviously everyone wanted a piece of Muhammad Ali, everyone, and even to this very day, everyone claims to know this, that, the other, and claims to have rights to this, that, and the other. Now, do you think that Muhammad Ali may at any time in his sort of progression between sort of 64 and 74 been manipulated by wider forces at all?
No, he was never manipulated by anybody. He wouldn't stand for it. Here is a guy, he came out of high school, he couldn't read or write that well. And he took the test for the Army, and he failed it. He was embarrassed that he couldn't read. If there were 6 dozen of apples, and the apples sold for 38 cents a piece, and how many dozen could you buy for $3? He couldn't figure that out. And then he was embarrassed that he failed it. And the next time he took the test, he qualified for OCS. So someone looked at that test and said, well, I'm going to take care of this guy.
So do you think they rigged, because I think he didn't qualify, then didn't they lower the level so that loads of other people
No,
could
they
get
didn't
in?
lower the level. Someone marking the test lowered the level.
Okay, yeah, no, that's interesting. That's really interesting.
Let me tell you something about the draft. When they were drafting, we're going to talk about, you're asking the questions, but I'm going to give you some questions, They talk about the draft. One time they would draft, they would have a number. You're going to go to this guy's going, that one's going. And well, then when he opposed it, the draft, then they said, we're going to change the system. We're going to pull a pill. And whatever number that is, or whoever it is, they're going to draft them. And then when they started to do that, and they're drafting senators and congressmen's son, they say, we got to do away with the draft. So he's one of the reasons that stopped the draft because of that. Now, let me tell you another thing. Through the negotiations of Herbert Muhammad, who was his manager, athletes at that time were making $40,000, $50,000 a year. And that was big money. The professional ball players here, Jim Brown, all the baseball players, Will Chamberlain, $80,000. That was big, big money. When Herbert started to negotiate with contracts and getting Muhammad Ali the big money, then all the other athletes started to make big money. That was because of Muhammad Ali, and that was because of Herbert Muhammad's negotiations.
And during the exile, I'm just going to go into the exile period now because this is when you came to really know him. This was, I think, between 68, 70, and 71, I believe. I think he spent 3.5 years in exile. Now, you knew him well during this period, and you probably one of the closest people to Muhammad, or probably the closest person to Muhammad Ali at this time, weren't you?
Well, I don't know how close I was. I mean, we were good friends, and the only one who could describe a friend is I could say I'm his friend, or he could say I'm my friend, you know. We can't have outsiders say, well, he's a good friend, and you don't know, so...
Right, well, obviously you were speaking to him on a regular basis, and I know you didn't become his manager till 1970, but...
Business manager
till 1970. Now, obviously, Ali has an immense power for sort of self-promotion and being up and always being positive and always almost like self-hypnosis, talking himself and saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to beat this guy, call this round, whatever. Now, at this point where the government tried to clamp down on him, by taking away his passport, by taking away his title, by fining him and all the rest of it. It's almost like everything, he's been beat down quite a lot by the system. Now, at this point, which would be seen as quite a low point, you just said that these were the best years of his life. So how did he manage to turn it around when normal people, any normal person, would probably crumble under having been sort of under such pressure?
Well, there's an old saying here in America. It said, don't let them see you sweat. And if he would go on and he would tell everybody, I got this going, I got that going, I got this endorsement, never let them know you're down because they'll kick you when you're down. So he walked tall. He walked with pride. And people couldn't understand it, you know, and only the closest people to him knew the story. When he was fighting the draft, you know, Elijah Muhammad came in and gave him $100,000. To help his lawyers. Elijah was the best thing ever happened to Muhammad Ali, and Herbert Muhammad was one of the greatest sports managers in professional sports.
So Elijah Muhammad supported him in that exile period, really?
Yes, he did.
Can you say Elijah Muhammad, just so that, because my voice isn't going to be in it, so can you say, yes, Elijah Muhammad supported?
Yes, yes, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad supported Muhammad Ali. And if it wasn't for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, you would have never heard of Muhammad Ali. If it wasn't for Herbert Muhammad's negotiations with the contracts and all, a lot of great athletes wouldn't been making that money today.
And basically, in that time when he was being supported, then there was never any sense of struggle, because I know that obviously he wasn't earning money from fighting, so he was having money given to him from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Was there ever a point when he was ever low, where he ever sort of felt quite sad about anything that had happened, or was he always resolute in your eyes? He
was always up. He never felt sad. You know, he told me one time, you can't worry about what you cannot control. You can't have people like you who don't like you. You don't waste time. If someone doesn't like you, they're not going to like you. So why spend time with them? Go on to the ones who are going to like you. You know, everybody has their own idea and their own feeling about you. And you don't worry. You know, all I worry about in life is that my wife and my children are good, and my mom and my dad's support it, and the people close to me that loves me are happy, and that's the big thing.
Can you explain, just so that our listeners understand the transition, why did Muhammad Ali end up drifting away from the Nation of Islam?
Well, when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad died, I don't think he's away from I mean, people say he is. I don't know if he is. He'll always be a Muslim. I don't know if he is or not. I'm sure he's not. I'm sure he follows the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Wallace D. Muhammad, and it's the same with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. He's friends with all those people, and He doesn't have the time to be going to Savior's Day and all. His health doesn't permit him to. But in his heart, he's very thankful that he accepted Islam, and he knows what it's about, and he knows, how it helped him in life.
So because Wallerstein Muhammad actually made a point of distancing himself from what his father taught. So he's actually gone on record of saying this was a journey. He's actually said this is a journey that we all went on, and this is what we thought then, but this is not what we think now. And Muhammad Ali has publicly come out and said that himself. So obviously there was a distancing from the Nation of Islam.
I don't know what Wallace D. Muhammad is preaching. I haven't read any of the stuff he's preaching or not, and I do know that the Muslims' teachings and how they cared for the black man and wanted the black man to be educated and don't lay on the door of the white man begging for food. Support yourself, educate yourself, do for yourself. I don't know the followings of Wallace D. Muhammad today, but I do know this, that Muhammad Ali is very thankful that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad came into his life, which he said many, many, many times, and he was thankful for Herbert Muhammad's guidance. You hear all kind of stories from people who weren't even around us. You're doing a documentary on Ali, and I'm sure that you're talking to people who were never been to a fight with him, and they're going to be experts and explain everything. But that doesn't make history right.
Yeah, I've spoken to in fact, most of the people I've spoken to, if not all of them, have been around at the fights that he were, and they were sort of giving me a lot of the writers have been talking about ringside, being at the ringside, interviewing him before and after the Rumble, which is what we're going to talk about next. Basically, after the exile, obviously he comes back, his first fight, 3.5-year layoff, Jerry Quarry, Atlanta in October. How symbolic is this fight with Jerry Quarry?
That was a point of history, to come back in Atlanta. And Jerry Quarry was a white fighter. Today he would have been the heavyweight champ. He was a great fighter, but he came at the wrong time. From 1964 to 1974, you had the best heavyweights ever on planet Earth at that time. Any one of those guys, the top 10 guys, could have been the heavyweight champion today. And Muhammad Ali trained for the fight. He went in. He was a little rusty. He beat Jerry Quarry. And then he came back in New York, Oscar Bonavena, and then Joe Frazier, which he didn't get time to prepare. And I thought, that he beat Joe Frazier. I was with Muhammad Ali, and we got a call from Bud Schulberg a week after the fight, and he said, I just heard that Joe Frazier had died. And I called Dr. DeFree in Philadelphia, who was Joe's doctor, at the Graduate Hospital, and he said, no, Joe's, he had some tough times, but he's going to be okay. And Muhammad told me, if he dies, I'll never fight again.
What was Muhammad Ali's relationship like with Joe Frazier?
Well, Muhammad doesn't dislike anybody. He's promoting the fights. When he's fighting, I told Joe, I said, Joe, when you guys are old guys, I like to sit down in the park with the two of you. And Joe said, well, he called me a gorilla, and my kids had to go to school, and they're saying, your daddy's a gorilla. I said, well, Muhammad carried that too far. That wasn't right, Just because he's Muhammad Ali, it isn't that he's always right. And I discussed it with Muhammad, and Muhammad said, I didn't mean it to hurt him or that, and I do apologize, and I felt bad about it. That's Muhammad. But at that time, he didn't see it like that.
Isn't that part of the jesting that comes with promoting the fight? Because as we know, and you'll probably, I don't know if you'll agree with this, and you can tell me yourself, Ali was his own best promoter. Well,
he was a promoter's dream. They were getting, when he fought Frazier, each one of them was saying we're getting X amount of money, $5 million each. And they wasn't getting a percentage, so they really didn't have to promote the fight. But the promoters are saying, well, we got to do this. We have all our money tied up. We can't lose money on it. So then Muhammad would go out and promote it.
So he basically kind of did their jobs for them.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, just in the lead up, we're talking about Don Quarry, Schvallo,
Jerry Quarry.
Jerry Quarry, Schvallo, and also Frazier, which he lost. Now, Ken Norton as well, which he's only since the first two losses of his career, if I'm correct, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, the first two losses of his entire career. How does he cope with that? Because he's had an amazing run. And also, not to forget, he's come back after 3.5 years. So he's
Okay, let's talk about, well, let's go right on through the fights. He's fighting Ken Norton in San Diego. We're out there training for the fight. He's on the golf course. Some guy gave him a golf club. He ran up to hit the ball and turned his ankle. He tore all the tendons in his ankle. His ankle was all swollen. I said, well, we should call the fight off and let you... No, he said the promoter put up all his money on this fight, and we're gonna have to go through with it. So I brought the trainers in from the San Diego Chargers, and they used to tape his ankle every day. So he went on, and he lost the fight. He got the jaw broken in the second round, and he couldn't move right. But that's no excuse. He never alibied. He said, great champions never alibi, or do they feel sorry for themselves. So I remember when he was in the hospital with the broken jaw, and Kenny Norton came. I said, Kenny Norton's coming to see you. Oh, good. So when he said, I got something for him. So when Kenny Norton came in and he stood over him, he said, I'm sorry, champ, you're my hero, and Ali started telling him, I never want to fight you again. You're so good. Oh, you hit so hard. And you. So when Kenny left the room, he winked at me. He said, I got him. We're going to fight again. So they did fight again, and they fought in Los Angeles at the Forum, and Ali won the fight. But this is Ali. Then Bud Schulberg wrote the book, Loser and Still Heavyweight Champ. Even though Muhammad Ali lost to Joe Frazier, he was still the loser, but he was the heavyweight champ. He got all the money.
And then he eventually goes to fight Frazier, but Frazier then fights Foreman and loses. Is that right?
No, he fights Joe Frazier in New York.
He fights Joe Frazier in New York, and then he wins. Is that right? He wins.
Yeah. And he trained in Deer Lake, Pennsylvania. He ran in the snow. And to me, people ask me, what was Ali's best fight? I said, the second Joe Frazier fight. He moved on him. He hit him. He did whatever he wanted. I remember the next day, we walked. We stayed at the Essex House in New York. And we walked from the Essex House down to Madison Square Garden, about 14 blocks, in a suit, tie, overcoats. There was no damage. And this was Ali's greatest fight, where he wasn't hurt. And there was no banging. He won that fight.
Well, I was going to ask you, which fight do you think was his greatest fight? Because many people say the Rumble.
To me,
sorry, go on. You go.
To me, the second Frazier fight, he wasn't hurt. If you're a race driver and your car's all beat up in Hannah, that's not, even though you win, or you get killed or something, that's you go across the finish line and you're dead, but you still won the race. He wasn't hurt at all. That was his greatest fight. Now, the greatest heavyweight fight of all times was in Manila, how those guys banged each other. And I knew both fighters, and I was in the corner. I said, wow, they should abolish boxing. Bang, bang, you hear heads going. And getting back to the Foreman fight, everybody says about the Foreman fight. We were in Zaire, Africa, and the fight with George Foreman, nobody could come and hustle him here, hustle him there, go here, go there. We had nothing to do but train. I called back to MGM. We got the movies. We had first-class movies every night. I met with the American Embassy there. We got all our fresh food. We stayed in a big home by ourselves. And George was staying in a hotel. And then when the fight was delayed, they came and they said, George wants to go. I said, well, take the passports, because he'll never fight Ali again, because Ali wasn't afraid of him. So the fight went on, and Ali was ready for him. Ali, was ready to beat him. It just goes back to like Sonny Liston was the bully, Foreman was a bully. That's how I see it. And I like to say something else about in Zaire, Africa. The people loved him so much over there. Bodini brought over T-shirts, brought 100 T-shirts. And the president's man came in and bought up all the T-shirts. He didn't want T-shirts floating around with Ali's picture on. If Ali would have said, I want to be the president, the people would have followed him. Everybody loved him. It would have been a coup d'etat.
What did they say? What did they chant?
Ali Boumaier. You hear all kind of stories of people weren't even around us at that time. We got off the airplane at 4 a.m., and it was dark. It was pitch black, and people were yelling, Ali, Ali. And Ali turned to me and said, who don't they like over here? I said, I guess white people. He said, I can't say George Foreman is white. You're with me. Who else? I said, the Belgians. So Ali got off, and they're yelling, Ali, Booma. No, they're yelling, Ali, Ali. And Ali raised his hands, and he put his finger to his mouth. Shh. George Foreman's of Belgium. And they start yelling, Ali, Boumaye, Ali, Boumaye. I said to our interpreter, what does that mean? He said, that means kill him. Kill him. They hated the Belgians. The Belgians used to put the dogs on the people over there, German Shepherds. Now, here's George Foreman walks off the airplane, and he has a German Shepherd dog. I said, we're home free now.
It's almost that Ali almost set that up, and then George Foreman walked right into the trap by having a German Shepherd there, which probably wasn't.
Well, he didn't know. You know, everybody talks about Ali had great people around him. The inner circle. There wasn't one person would consider their life more valuable than Ali. All of us would have taken a bullet for him. We loved him so much. He respected us, and we respected him. George didn't have that. Kenny Norton said, if I'd have had Ali's team around me, I'd have beat Ali.
So you were in Zaire, and the build-up, obviously it gets postponed because of a cut and all the rest of it. That must have been quite... Wasn't Ali ready to leave at that stage because he was a bit...
Never.
Sorry.
There's all kind of talks.
You start again. You start again.
Go ahead.
You start. I'm not interrupt you. I want you to hear your complete...
Okay. We're in Zaire, Africa. George Foreman gets his eye cut. They come back. They tell us, and they said, George Foreman just got his eye cut. I tell Jimpupu, Washer Jimpupu was the first guy to the president. I said, if he leaves there, there'll never be another fight. So right away he takes his passports. And Ali starts saying, I love it here so much, I want to move here. All the people love them for it. There was rumors that they want to bring Joe Frazier over to fight. That never happened like that. So Dick Sadler, he handled George's cut real well. He did the butterfly sutures on it. And George stayed there and continued on with the fight. But if he would have left there, we would have never fought again. He wouldn't have never fought Ali because Ali wasn't afraid of him. Ali used to degrade him and scream at him. And, you know, Ali had no fear. But getting back to the Foreman fight, I went into the dressing room. They were taping George's hands, and Dick Sadler was there, and Archie Moore, and Archie saying, I feel death in the air. I feel death in the air. And I went back and I said, Ali said, what's he talking? I said, he's talking about putting your kids in an orphanage. Ooh, I can't wait to get him. Casamata told him, your first punch that you throw must be with bad intentions. And if you watch the fight, you'll see George comes out with his fist closed. And Ali went up on his right hand and hit him so hard, boom, and the lights went out. And then Ali called him every name and degraded him, and all the talk in there about we loosened the ropes. We did this. George said something. He was drugged. He was drugged with Ali's jabs and right crosses. The mat was too soft. We tightened the ropes up so they would be tight. We didn't want Ali falling out of the ring. But George got beat. Ali beat him. Ali outslicked him. People were telling Ali off the ropes. He told him, shut up. Who are you to tell me? I know what he does. I know about him. We were watching a movie, the second Frazier fight with George Foreman. I used to get Ali all the movies of his opponents. We would study it. And he watched George Foreman. He knocked Frazier down, and then he gets back to the ropes. And he used the ropes to get back to the neutral corner. Ali said, run it back, run it back. Not to the knockout. Watch him on the ropes. And now George was helping himself back to the corner on the ropes. He said, Gene, I got him. No stamina. He don't know what it is. Round 4, round 5, round 6, round 7. No gas tanks out here, George. You're out of gas. I got you. And he fought it the way he planned it. It was his own plan. No one else said anything to him. People tried to tell him against it. He told them, shut up. Who did you ever whoop? Who are you to tell me?
And can you tell me about actually, you alluded to it before, very in a line, but just very briefly, just tell me, was it again like a reflection of 10 years previously with David and Goliath again, where everyone thought
Do you
that George
realize
Foreman
that
was going to
Muhammad
win?
Ali lost the title in 1964? He wasn't the heavyweight champion. 10 years later, came back and won the title. 10 years later. 10 years later, and was still boxing in between that and making money, after the exile, making more money than the heavyweight champs were making. The only time a fighter made money is when they fought Ali. Fighters would fight for $10,000, $20,000. When they fought Ali, they get $1 million, $500,000. So he made all the other fighters a big payday.
Did you
Like
say
Bud
Ali,
Schulberg said, loser and still heavyweight champ.
Did you say that Ali lost the title in '64?
Yeah.
But he won it in '64, in February '64.
I'm sorry, he won the title in 60. He won the title in 64.
Can you say that again? Because can you just?
Yeah,
Because
okay.
that was a really good. That was a very good line.
He won his title in 1964, and then he fought Frazier and he lost, and 10 years later, after winning it in '64 with the draft, the 3 years exile, losing to Frazier. 10 years later, he comes back, 1974, wins the title back. This is remarkable. This is remarkable.
Can you talk about also, very, very briefly, because he wasn't actually at the peak of his fitness. No one would be, 3.5 years out. He's physically changed. He's physically not as quick on his feet. Can you just tell me a little bit about his fitness and how he had to work hard to get back to where he was?
Let me tell you something. There is no more a devoted individual in the sport of boxing. Hank Stram, the great football coach, who was a Hall of Famer, the National Football Hall of Fame, he said, I never seen an individual train like Ali does. I wish football players would train like that. He was so dedicated. Those 3 years, he still ran. When he was fighting, everywhere we would go, he would wear his big army boots. I used to get him those big boots he would wear. And then when he put his boxing shoes on, it was real light. We'd get up in the morning, no matter where we were, the whole city was asleep. He'd say, call me at 4:30. Okay, I'd call him 4:30. Okay, champ, let's go run. He could run in the park or run here, run there. He'd come back, exercise. And the same way when he was training, there's a name, Louis Soria. He was our unsung hero. He was the one put Ali through all the exercises, all the rubbing, all the massages. There are people say that they're Ali fans. I said, you know Louis Soria? No. He was a Cuban who defected to Miami and worked with Angelo Dundee with fighters. This is, no one would ever know and would even believe the stuff that happened.
I want to ask you about Muhammad. I'm aware that we're sort of running out of time as well, but I want to ask you quickly, just sort of to conclude, I'm going to ask you a bit about his family life, what he was like as a dad, also the transition between, because I know you knew all of his wives, and certainly around the Rumble in the Jungle, there was a crossover between Belinda and sort of Veronica came on the scene then. Can you tell me about how, about that element? What was he like with his family? I know that I've heard he was a really good family man.
Well, I met Sanji. She was the first wife. He was a young kid. He met this beautiful little girl, and they got married. And she didn't want to wear the long dresses and everything. And they kind of split. And then he met Belinda. She was a 17-year-old lady, and she was one of the nicest people in the world. And she was good. And all of a sudden, she got caught up in the BS, like, wanted to sign autograph, wanted to give talks and all, and then I was with him when he met Veronica. Veronica was a very beautiful girl and a very humble girl and a quiet girl, a good person, and they hit it off. And at that time, he wasn't hitting it off with Belinda. They had something going that wasn't right, but that doesn't make her a bad person. She was a great person, and she comes from a good home. I know her mom and dad real well. I knew her sisters.
Is this
A
Belinda you're
good
talking
person.
about? Is this Belinda?
Huh?
Is this Belinda you're talking?
Belinda, yeah. A good person. But she got caught up in it, as so many people do when they marry a superstar. They think they're the superstar. And And Veronica was a beautiful girl, a nice girl, a quiet girl. He got married, and I was in his wedding, when he married Veronica. And then after he was done fighting, he got sick, and they went different ways. But he's always had a warm spot in his heart for all his wives. He was a good father. He loved his children. He told me one time his biggest dream would be just to have a big farm and have all the kids there just with him every day. He loved children. I used to see him when we traveled all over the world. He would take little babies and hug them and kiss them and all. And he said, I wish this could be my baby. There's time and the world puts such a demand on you that you can't be with your children. And I hope, when I pray to God that my children does all right, and maybe God, if he sees me treating people right, they'll be good and God look out for them.
So how difficult was it for Ali to balance the challenge of the fight? Because it was around the time of the Rumble that he met Veronica. So was it difficult for him to, because obviously it was stressful, he met Veronica, Belinda, it wasn't going well. Was it because could it have been the fact that he spent a lot of time travelling and he didn't really get to see his family very much?
Well, I said that. He traveled a lot. He didn't get to see his family, but nothing bothered Muhammad. Muhammad had a certain way of looking at things better than any person alive. Some people look at a watch, but Muhammad would look inside the watch. Some people would look at a bed. Muhammad would look under the bed. Muhammad, a way of judging people and doing things, just don't judge people. He said to me one time, he said, we always got to remember that man judges man's action and God judges man's heart. You may see a guy acting crazy and loud and all, but he may have a good heart, and the only one who could judge his heart is God.
And so it must have been quite painful for Belinda when she found that he'd found somebody new in Veronica at that time.
Well, anytime there's a split, it's painful. It's tough. Nothing lasts forever. I can't see any divorce or any split but he took care of Belinda financially real well, and he did what he thought was right in his heart.
Ali was known as a womanizer. He liked the ladies. Would you agree with that?
Well, here's a big, handsome man, a charming man, not a crude man, a kind man. He's an attraction. If everybody, they say, any power guy, everybody talks, well, he was a womanizer, he's that, he's this. It's a lot of temptation for a girl to see a guy like Muhammad, who's a handsome man and a charming man. It is temptation.
But then again, with temptation, that is something that a lot of us could do the same, and sort of yield. Is there not some sort of discipline that could be applied, do you think?
Well, I don't even know how to answer that question. I said that, that they said Muhammad was a womanizer. He was kind to everybody. I seen girls get pictures taken with him, and they were telling everybody they had an affair, which they weren't. You can't believe everything you hear, everything you read.
I'm just going through sort of Ali towards the ending of his career. When do you think Ali started showing, or from your opinion, when did he start showing signs of Parkinson's?
I hear all kinds of stories. People said after the Foreman fight, it didn't happen till, and I've been around him, when he fought George Foreman, I pleaded with him to retire, get out on top, and don't fight anymore. And then they come back with the Larry Holmes fight, $8 million. And he said, anyone would fight Larry for $1 million. $8 million, that's a lot of money. No one would turn that down. And he was right. You can beat everything but Father Time. Father Time takes care of everything. But I noticed that when he was retired from boxing, after the Trevor Berbick fight and all, and he'd come to Vegas to see me, I would go to L.A. to see him, and I noticed his speech was a little slur. And then I went to see him in the hospital, and he wasn't as quick as he used to be. And then he went to New York, and he found out he had Parkinson's syndrome. And I talked to him about it at his 50th birthday, and he was sharp then, and we knew it would get worse, the Parkinson's syndrome and the Parkinson's. And he said, don't feel sorry for me. He said, I have no pain. I'm sharp, and if my speech is a little slur, if people want to listen to me, they're going to have to listen a little intensive. And, I have no pain. So he said, I've done things in life that wasn't right, I guess, and God just slapped me on the wrist. I don't have cancer. I have all my memories. He got good recall. He recalls everything. And I told him, I said, I feel sad when I see you're a prisoner in your own body.